If you look at why the giants were created, they were to do what the gods didn't want to do, to get blood on their hands. They were there to destroy humankind and replace them. And they got very close a few times. And we're going to see that sort of resurge in the end time. So that war gene, whether it's an actual gene or not, the rulers of the world have been very violent all through our history, and they've all were kind of related, and it was always an interfamily fight.
All right, you guys, what if I told you that all of human history was a lie? Many of you wouldn't be surprised. Some of you need to hear the truth. Today's return guest, the one and only Gary Wayne, has spent his entire life decoding the secret history that they don't want us to know. The history of fallen angels, ancient giants, and the non-human bloodlines that secretly rule our world. That sounds a little like a fantasy novel, huh? It's not. Because today we're pulling back the curtain on the truth that's been hidden in plain sight. We're going to talk about the real reasons why the giants were created by the so-called gods. We'll decode the secret language of the royal family crests and find out what King Charles's unicorn really means. We're going to discuss and expose the war gene that's been hardwired into these so-called global elites, which drives their endless need for conflict and bloodlust. We're going to talk about why every major conflict seems to lead right back to the Middle East, and we're also going to delve into the terrifying connection between AI and the biblical image of the beast. If you still think politicians run the world after you watch this podcast, then you weren't paying attention. Enjoy. So man, our last conversation was incredible and epic, and of course people really gravitated towards it, as they typically do with a man with your extensive knowledge. But I want to kind of pick up where we left off and maybe cover some new ground. But last time you were here on the show, you walked us through how the so-called elites, or as I like to call them, the parasite class, including the royals, how they trace their bloodlines back through secret societies to ancient deities and gods, and not always benevolent ones. And they aren't even hiding it for the most part. This part, people look at King Charles's crest and they see 3 lions and a unicorn, no big deal, just national symbols. But of course, they come from someplace. So, I mean, what are we really looking at? What is the story that crest is actually telling people?
Yeah, getting into the taciturn language of heraldry is an interesting topic. So it's always good to cover off, because they're not shy, as you say, they're not shy about putting that stuff out there. They just know we're not really informed enough or smart enough to understand what they're actually telling us. So it'll be good. It'll be very good to go into that, but feel free to go anywhere where you want to go.
Okay. I mean, just
whatever your audience wants to hear.
What does that crest, those 3, the lions and the unicorn and the symbology what does that mean for people who are just thinking like, oh, that's a cool that's a cool ring, it's cool jewelry?
I don't generally focus on things like the lines, but you can get information on heraldry about the lines.
Right.
It's obviously significant, but not as significant as the other images. So when you have a lion or a unicorn or a dragon or an eagle or a bull, or images that sort of have these creatures that are on there, they're not just sort of creatures that are drafted to present some sort of imagery of a brave person like Richard the Lionheart, right? That's what they would have you believe. That goes back to the bloodlines of the original fallen angels. And if you have more than one creature that's on there, then that means there's been an ennobling of it. And there may be some lower level ennobling, but because they can only get so much on there, and they have to have a hierarchical, genealogical patriarch to go back to. And typically it's the patriarch and not the matriarch. But that's a different sort of
Yeah.
animal in terms of heraldry and stuff like that, because it's the house of the male, right? So
Right.
even though the female has such an important role in creating dynasties, it's not represented in the heraldry.
Mm-mm.
So yeah, these are their gods that give them their divine authority to rule. And when they take their oath to a particular god, that's the one that their genealogy goes back to, and they've received their authority from the Council of the Gods. So
And when you say ennobling, you mean kind of almost like an anointing of these lesser deities into the family of this higher deity.
yeah, but ennobling and anointing in through blood marriage of
Mm.
generally through the female to add in, but sometimes through the male, which is probably why you see only a few of the male side, because most of the kings or most of the royalties that are ruling are the kings versus the queens, right? At least in our society. So it's probably would be representative more of a major one brought in through the male side versus the female side.
And so I'm sure this would be debatable among many of the current supporters of this administration, but what, in my opinion, and what I perceive is essentially, while these bloodlines and these families and these heads of industries, we know who they are. We don't have to rattle off the same names we've been talking about, but they're still puppeting governments to do the same things they always have. Now, whether there's been like a silent, kind of white hat movement to put them in a greater state of check, I mean, maybe, hopefully, but I don't see it making a tremendous impact anyway. And my question is, if what is these bloodlines are obviously still steering most nations through their ownership of the politicians, right? And how comes every road always seems to travel straight to the Middle East?
Hmm. Well, there's layers of questions there. Are we doing, are we recording right now?
Yes, we are. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's fine, because I just want to make sure, because I want to go back and I'll answer that one in just a second. So I'll finish off then in
Okay.
terms of the fallen angels and tongue in cheek, and from my biases, I kind of call them the celestial mafia godfathers.
Yeah.
And so when we look at a dragon that's on a coat of arms, that's not a fictional creature. It's one of the watcher angels. And the particular one is a seraphim, serpent-faced, six-winged dragon angel. And so it's the seraphim that were the most, I guess, committed watchers to create the bloodlines. And they created most of the red-haired and blonde-haired, hazel-eyed and blue-eyed giants. But there are other watchers as well. There's 4 groups of watchers, and they're at the top of the hierarchy of the angelic order, whether it's loyal or rebellious, whatever, depending on whichever belief system you're coming from. And that would be recognized as the council of the gods. And there's a hierarchy within that council for the 70 nations. So you have 70 nations, and then you have the major gods that go, and you can count them either as 12 or 10 or 7. It's all important within how they run their government, but there's a hierarchy that's in there. And so the higher up the chain in the hierarchy of the angel that produces the giants or the royals, the higher up they're recognized within their hierarchy, and the purity of that bloodline, and or the ennobling of another watcher or high level bloodline in there would give them some greater status with what they call a scioning, or grafting in of another bloodline. So the other watchers to keep in mind for the most part are mostly the cherubim.
Mm.
And the cherubim are, just as they're depicted biblically as being posted outside the gates of Eden after the fall of Adam and Eve to guard the gates have this flaming swords. They're like a more warrior than governing, as just as most people would define a cherub as a guardian angel. Not that God needs a guard, but they surround him, and their wings provide a covering. The seraphim are more working at the altar. You would have the same sort of setup in the Council of the Gods, because it's almost like a mirror image. It's just which side you're on. And so when we look at the cherubim, it has 4 different faces. When they take a physical form, just as when a seraphim angel takes a physical form, they're going to choose to reflect what their spiritual nature is in a physical form. So you're going to see for the seraphim angels, dragon gods like dragon creator gods. You're going to see gods like Anki or Enlil that are seraphim, or from a female perspective, Tiamat. You're going to have gods like the Nagas, the plumed serpents, the feathered serpents.
Right.
So
The quetzalcoatl almost.
exactly. And then when you get into the cherubim, what's unique about them is they have 4 different faces, but they're not going to appear with 4 different faces. They're going to appear with one face, and they're going to choose the face that they're going to appear with. So you could have a human face, you could have a lion face, you could have a bird, eagle, raven face, or you could have a ox, more likely a bull. I think ox is a poor translation coming out of the Hebrew, and then more of a bull. Just as you see sphinxes depicted with a lion face or a human face, and cherubs, which are the same beings, and when we say cherub, that used to be pronounced K as cherub.
Ah.
So it's just a transliteration. You're going to see bulls in the Middle East, and you're going to see these sort of gargoyle things, but those are the bird-faced ones. And when we see them on reliefs in the Middle East, there's this one image of Anunnaki watchers that are doing this ritual around some sort of technology. Some people call it a tree of life, but whatever it is, they're doing a ritual around it. They have a crystal in a bag, and one has as a depiction of these stocky-like angels with these wings on their backs, and they have a human face that has dark hair, as in black and dark curly beards. And then there's an identical relief of the same type of ritual with the same type of beings, because they're identical except they have an eagle's face. Those are cherubim, just different formats in terms of what they formed into. So if they reproduce, they're going to reproduce beings that look like them. So originally you're going to have a lot of serpentine looking giants, just as you have all of the serpentine and dragon imagery around the royal imagery, right? And the best way to look at it would be from an accurate depiction would be more like the Egyptian one, where they have these head caps that would cover a large elongated skull, but it's cobra-like with the dressing that comes down.
That's right.
And so it's that stocky, wide, long neck, that cobra-like
that hooded,
neck.
Yeah,
that is how they would have more originally looked, which is what they're trying to re-represent downstream, as they have to intermarry after the flood with humans and start to lose some of those traits. So if you have dark-haired giants like Gilgamesh, that Nimrod is associated with because he lived in Sumeria, they're a little bit different with that dark hair, and that would probably come from cherubim, from that human face, just as they're depicted. So if you have Nephilim that would have looked like a lion, like King Arioch, which means lion-like, and Aryans, Ariel, lion of God or God's lion, as you take those words back to the original meanings, and Aryan meaning the noble ones, and the I am on the plural with the cherubim, the seraphim, the ophanim, for example, is a ancient understanding of a majestic bloodline that comes from the gods. And Nephilim, Rephaim, Horim, all the different names of the giants that I like to use with the I am plural to be accurate because of the meaning of that name. And it also is plural for not just plural, but is in ones. So it's like Nephilim would be giant ones, Seraphim would be serpent ones, Cherubim would be like the four-faced ones, right? So
Wow.
yeah, so the ancient language, when you understand it in the full context, brings more of the meaning out. We just don't get that all transmitted into the English. So you're going to have like linemen of Moab that are talked about in the Bible, or lion like men of Gad. You're going to have the Urmalahu of the lion warriors in Mesopotamia. You're going to have these lion warriors depicted on reliefs in Egypt, and so on and so forth. So when we see these gargoyles on churches, that would be a cherubim angel.
A what?
So a cherubim.
Oh, a cherubim. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, be the bird-faced one.
And you
what's
see them in New
interesting-
York. I've seen them in New York City. You see them in Europe. You
Yeah.
see them all over.
Yeah, just what are they loyal or disloyal, depending on which perspective that you're looking from. And so in Southeast Asia, you have these giants that are called Tengu. And Tengu is also a word associated with watcher. So again, produced from the same watchers. And you can Google Tengu, Tengu, and you're going to get these bird-faced warriors and priests. They spawn both bloodlines. So you have this recollection that sort of shows up in the superheroes today, because these are the heroes of old, right? Demigods, offsprings of the gods and a human female, or a goddess and a human male. Just as Gilgamesh is the offspring of the bull goddess, fertility goddess, cherubim goddess, and Lugalbanda, king of Uruk. So, and he's a little bit different, and he's got this dark hair, which puts him probably in the cherubim branch as well with the imagery. So this imagery was created in the heraldry to put on standards or coats of arms, which gives a taciturn language with the genealogies. And so the reason why they invented it was they used to put it on what they call flags or standards, so that when they rode into another realm, they would fly their standard, and the royale of that realm would recognize who they are, and from the imagery that's on there and where they fit into the hierarchy. And that continues to this day. So when you see that change, that coat of arms change a little bit from generation to generation, that's the intermarriage that's going on, that's going to play within it. But typically they're going to hold on to the main genealogical roots to that house.
It just crossed my mind. Why do Beyonce and Jay-Z and all these celebrities who love to be like, why do they always wear a goat, like the horned,
the horned god?
Yeah. Like what's that in?
But typically in a goat, right?
Right.
It could be a bull, but typically they're going to a specific god. And so a goat god, like a pan god, is a specific order of angels, but seems to be a degraded format of one of the watcher groups, likely the Seraphim. Azazel, leader of the watchers out of the book of Enoch, is depicted as a goat. And so we want to, when we look at these satyrs or satyr gods as they're understood, they have a unique position in the post-Diluvian pantheon that's not well answered. And what do I mean by that? So you have a horned god like Odin, and he's said to be the chief god of the Norse mythology.
The All-Father, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the Old Father. But we don't get a whole lot more information on him, but he's clearly recognized from at least a warrior status and a kingship status that he's the chief god. Now, in the Greek pantheon, you have the pan god, and several other gods that are satyr-like as well, as like Innis and other ones
Mm-hmm.
that are named in Greek mythology. I won't go through all of them. But Pan's the most famous, and he's a satyr god, and festivals were done for him,
Right.
at the time of Valentine's Day and other rituals that go on in Greece as well. But where does he fit in with the Olympian gods? He's
Mm.
important. He has special festivals. He's
Mm-hmm.
acknowledged, with significant temples and things, but we're not really told where he fits. We have a similar thing with the Celtic pantheon, where you have Cernunnos,
Mm.
and he is a horn god and a nature god, just as Odin is, just as the Pan god is. But he doesn't really fit into the overall hierarchy as the chief god, but he's really, really important, and he's there, and he's sort of unaccounted for. And these are the same god. This is the same god or the same group of gods. And CERN is an Indo-Aryan word, the
Mm.
language of the giants. And in that, it means a horn-headed god. There's actually a god in the Etruscan pantheon that's called CERN, C-E-R-N. Also can be spelled K-E-R-N,
Mm.
Kern or CERN, depending on how you transliterate that coming down. So when you see CERN being used as an acronym that they made
Particle
up, that
smasher.
yeah, and they're trying to go interdimensionally where the fallen
Yeah.
angels were put into the prison,
My
you kind of
God.
think, well, I'm thinking, no, I'm not buying in your acronym. You're probably honoring a
Mm-hmm.
destroyer god, Abaddon and Apollyon. And so, how do you get there from a horn-headed god to Azazel, Abaddon, Apollyon, Shiva, and Mithra? Just to throw in a few other
Yeah.
names that. And so, Shiva is a destroyer god, and it's kind of a cosmology of a god that shows up downstream. But the older version would be Mithra. And I think Mithra is
Mm.
probably a better analogy to sort of look at it from a historical perspective. And that comes out of the Zoroastrian religion, or the religion that was before the flood that crosses the flood.
Mm.
And Mithra is one of the main gods in there. Again, a unique position.
Does Mithra have
Uh,
another name that people know him by?
well, I think that's Azazel.
Oh, okay,
So
okay.
but it has some interesting meanings, like Mitra, M-I-T-R-A, um, without the H being pronounced in Sanskrit and in Indo-Aryan, it means a covenant and a bond.
Mm.
And this is a god that is a destroyer god and a recreator god. And so, just as Shiva comes back, Mithra does the same thing, comes back at the end of an age, of a specific age, generally, in this case, the age of Aquarius, and destroys the world by fire and then recreates the world out of those ashes.
Mm.
So, and Mithra is a avatar god like Vishnu, but different. Again, distinct, high level position. So Vishnu and Shiva also is a avatar god. What do I mean by an avatar god? Because most people, when they look at the term avatar, they're looking at the human that receives a presence, right? An incarnation. It's not in the older understanding of it. There's two words: avatar and avatara. Avatar is the god, Avatara is the receiver or the host spirit and body and soul of the individual. So in this example, Vishnu was an avatar and entered into Buddha and provided additional wisdom. And Vishnu incarnated like almost 20 times, if my memory serves me correctly on that. And Shiva incarnated as well, but not as many times. Actually, incarnated into, um, well, there's two different versions on that with Narashima, which is the lion god, um, demigod. I've got accounts in my files where you've got both Vishnu and Shiva that were the avatar, whichever one it is. they both did the same sort of thing. So Mithra does that as well. So there's an allegory for the end time Antichrist that comes out of the New Age and Eastern religions and Gnosticism, that is Lord
Mm.
Maitreya. Well, Lord
Ah.
Maitreya is Lord Mithra,
Hmm.
right? And he would be the avatara of the God that's coming back in the end time to bring the destruction by fire. Now, how do you get this connection back to Azazel? Not only as a destroyer god, but there was a specific god that the Templars, who are polytheistic, worshipped, and that was Baphomet. It means Father Mithra.
Hmm.
But the god that they honored through the Western name, same God, and the one who provided the knowledge that they partially received, mostly through the excavations underneath the temple and brought back to Europe, was Azazel.
Mm.
So he's the one that is hung upside down in Roslyn Castle with
Oh,
the rope with the Z and the pearls of wisdom. That's
wow.
Azazel. So the one that they're worshiping is Father Mithra, Azazel. And again, you see, I'm not sure what the right word is, but you have these vernacular names for the same God in
Hmm.
different languages and religions of the main hierarchy, of the upper hierarchy. So yeah, so when we talk about goat gods, just as Azazel is depicted as a goat god,
Right.
and he was a seraphim watcher.
Hmm.
So I look at these satyr gods or satyr gods, however you want to pronounce it, as being a degraded form of watcher as part of the punishment. Just as
Ah.
Satan, from a monotheistic perspective, was degraded from whatever status of angel he was
Right.
down to kind of like he's associated with goats as well.
Yes. That's who I was
But
thinking of when
yeah,
you know, um,
but he would be, again, higher than Azazel. Azazel would be one of the seven Satans in the book of Enoch, one of the seven ones that answer um, to Satan, and Satan sits above the council of the gods. So he
right.
would be like the nebulous life force in Gnosticism that procreated with Sophia to create the 12 archons that the Gnostics
Um,
say the God of the Bible was created at that time and then went rogue.
wow. Where just this I want to get to my next question, but I got to
Yeah.
ask, where do Remphan and Moloch come into this? Speaking of, the Middle East and Israel, and
Yeah.
I keep learning more about this star that portrays. I mean, we're told is the Star of David, but
Yeah.
we're never
It's
told
a,
why or how, and I think that's
yeah,
for a reason.
yeah, and
Um,
it's a six-pointed star, not a five-pointed star as well, right? So
right. So it's a pentagram.
it hexagram
Or a
for
hexagram,
six.
yeah, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
associated, yeah.
So, but still, a star is a star. Star represents an angel.
Mm,
It doesn't matter whether it's monotheism or it's polytheism. So just as the gods are represented by planets and stars in the skies, they're the seven wandering stars as they're described in the Bible. Angels are described as stars. You just can't, when you see the similarity across the world in terms of how the allegorical references to these beings
mm,
there's a consistency there. So I think whatever belief system you come from, we should understand that when we see a star, it's got something to do with an angel or a god. And so
makes sense.
this star of Remphan is not necessarily the Star of David. That is more of a Rosicrucian imagery that
Mm,
is drafted into the Zionist movement to recreate the nation
Nation of
state of
Israel, yeah.
Israel. So it's not a Jewish one. It's sort of inserted within recent sort of history.
Hmm.
So when we
Adopted.
adopted, yes.
Yeah.
um, so when we look at uh, the Star of Remphan, it's an ancient sort of symbol, and people will have a lot of different sort of meanings as to what that means. I mean, we get that name coming out of the Bible,
Hmm.
but we also have some references in the occult to it as well. So there's a specific meaning to that. It escapes me what the special sort of meaning that we should take from it, but it goes back to ancient times.
Hmm.
It goes back to Babel. It goes back to the Egyptian Empire. It goes back to these ancient civilizations.
What does it mean when they say it's of the tabernacle of Moloch? And
Well,
is
let's look at Moloch now. Moloch is something that we can get a little bit closer to. And again, the Star of Remphan is associated with the Baalim Council as
mm,
well. So Moloch is one of the council of the gods in the Canaanite culture that ruled from Mount Saphon, we would know as Mount Hermon today. Um, and Moloch is a bull god, as he's represented, a horn god.
mm,
So he would be very much in that sort of tradition. Some people say Moloch is just another name for Baal, but even in the
oh yeah,
Ugaritic texts where you have Baal, you also have Moloch. So
mm,
I'm thinking there's two different gods that are in there. And Baal can be called a bull god as well, but he's more seraphim, and he seems to wear more of a head dressing than
mm-hmm,
being a bull, right? Now, there's imagery and language that describes, whether it's in Sumeria or whether it's in Canaan and elsewhere, that all the gods were understood as bulls.
mm,
And so their offspring were also known as bulls. So when people talk about, while giant as in Nephilim can mean bully, that doesn't mean giant. It just means that they were bullies. Well, they were called bulls. That's where the term bully comes from.
right. Oh,
Right?
duh.
Yeah. So it's just part of the definition. There's not something different going on there. Um, so yeah, when we look at Moloch, and Moloch, some people think was the son of Baal, but the more you dig into that, that doesn't seem to be the case. He seems to be a god that would be almost on par with Baal and other gods of the Baalim Council, whether it's Amaru or whoever you want to talk about. But it's part of that Baalim group of gods, as they're called biblically. So Moloch is one that had a lot of babies sacrificed
That's
to
right.
it.
I was going to say, isn't that
Yeah,
they call him the god of child sacrifice? I'm like, how can you be a god of
yeah.
like that's what
And
you're in charge of? I don't like. Wow.
yeah, and Moloch is very similar to a allegorized mythos that is used in the Merovingian bloodlines, which is a Quinotar. Quinotar is this horn sort of god as well that people were sacrificed to, and particularly babies. And I think there's a correlation there describing their hidden bloodlines that's going back to a cherubim watcher.
Hmm. Wow. And how come Israel seems to be the focal point, or Palestine, that part of the quote Holy
Yeah.
Land? I mean, we know some of the elites believe in the prophecy of it, but what does the prophecy say about it, about Israel?
Well, there's a lot of in prophecy about Israel. So but I'll get back to that in a second.
Okay,
I
okay,
didn't
okay.
mean
Sorry.
I wasn't trying to dismiss that. So when we look at that region, and we need to look at Mount Hermon as being probably the original holiest mountain in the world.
Hmm.
So, as I said in the Ugaritic text, it was called Mount Saphon. It was known as Nippur in the Sumerian pantheon, and that's where the
Hmm.
cedar forest is located, the cedars of Lebanon, and where Gilgamesh and Enkidu went to kill King Hababa, the terrible one that had special authority from the gods. And biblically, we're told that Mount Hermon was named Sirion by some nations, Shinir by other nations, and also known as Sion, S-I-O-N, a different Hebrew word for Sion or Zion, because you would take that back to the Hebrew, but essentially kind of pronounced similarly, and that the name for Mount Hermon changed to Hermon from most of these names that start with an S or a TS in the Old Semitic. So Haram is the root word for Hermon in Hebrew, and Haram has two or three different variations but all with the same meanings of curse and accursed. And this is the home where the Watchers swore their oath. This is the oath of Haram anathema, the ecclesiastical curse to carry it out to the end. And I think Mount Hermon's name was changed to that to reflect what happened, likely both before and after the flood, with the gods, fallen angels, taking that oath to create spurious offspring. And so when we look at Mount Hermon, this is an ancient holy mountain that God biblically takes back in the end time, brings it back into the fold. It's part of the land of the covenant. So when you look at the Council of the Gods, and as it's described in most cultures around the world that rules over the 70 nations, the gods have a specific territory assigned to them. We get this biblically in Deuteronomy 32. And so, and again, in book 1, I cover many of the nations where you've got the same accounting. And so it's, again, we have this commonality of history, just a different lens that it's being seen through. And so in this governing over those nations, God has a specific piece of property reserved for himself.
Right.
And that's what we would understand as Eden. And Eden, as it's described from a biblical perspective, goes from the Nile River to the Euphrates River to the rivers coming out of the mountains where Mount Hermon is and is a source for the Jordan River down to the Indian Ocean, and the same land, same description described after the flood that Abraham is permitted to have. And he's gifted to by God, because that's his portion. The other gods have other portions that they rule over. So this is a mountain within God's original covenant land that the fallen angels took and have been permitted to keep. So it's going to be important to both sides. It doesn't matter how you get there.
Right.
It's going to be important for both sides. And if we are going into the end time of Aquarius or the end time of the Bible, then Mount Hermon's going to have a very important role in the not so distant future. So we should keep an eye on that, but it's just part of the greater sort of covenant land that was gifted to Israel. Now, Israel, when they were,
these days.
it's a tough, yeah, it is.
My God.
When Israel was formed as a nation in the time of Moses, they were gifted this land. And inherited through the covenant made with Abraham from a biblical sort of perspective. Now, when they violated the covenant...
Yeah, they were kicked out, weren't they?
Yeah, they kept violating the Holy Covenant. And when the covenant was written, they were warned, you can fulfill your destiny through the blessings of the covenant or the curses of the covenant.
Wow.
And with the violations, the northern kingdom was lost into the nations until the end time, when they'll be called back by name. They have not awakened yet. So people should be careful of the end time chronology from whatever perspective you're coming from.
Right.
And also, the southern kingdom of Judah repented, but then they started violating the covenant again. They were exiled to Babylon. They were forgiven. They come back. Then they reject their Messiah. And then they're funny. So these are the curses of the covenant that Israel's going through based on their own choices. And so within the Holy Covenant, it said, if you do not hold up the covenant, this is what's going to happen, but I will bring you back in the end time. Now, and it's also referring to a second Exodus in the end time. So we have to be careful with the application, and we have to be careful with the understanding of a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. So it's just the southern kingdom that we see as Judah today, which includes 3 tribes, Levi, Benjamin, and Judah for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're not told how the nation of Israel, from a biblical prophetic side, we're not told how the first ones get back to Israel. What we're told is that during the time of the Gog War, in the end time, they're in the land of the covenant.
Mm-hmm.
And this great army is going to come in and try and destroy them. But we're not told how they get there. We only know that in Daniel 9:27, that in that period, when they're already there and when they control Jerusalem, at some point in time where Lord Maitreya, Antichrist, is going to negotiate the 7-year covenant, they're going to be permitted to do sacrifices on a wing of the temple where the Muslim mosque is currently located today, which is a big obstacle.
I can't believe they haven't just bombed it into oblivion. I guess maybe they feel like that would be bad for their.
Well, you'd have a massive war.
Well, I know, but that they seem to really enjoy that? So,
well,
I mean, but I feel like because they feel it's theirs too to bomb. It might be it might be like over the line.
They're not going to bomb the Holy of Holies.
Yeah, because it would be bad for them too.
Yeah, they would. Yeah. That's bad spiritually for them. It would be it's just something they can't do. So it's a bit of a mystery as to how that's going to come about. It's going to take a universal religion to make that happen, because Islam is never going to permit them, even if it's on a wing or extremity. And as Josephus placed the Holy of Holies, it was more towards the valley. So the description in 927 in the book of Daniel is on a wing or an extremity or an overspreading of the temple. So I don't look for a new building of the temple, but with the universal religion where Islam would have to be subservient to, this universal religion, as negotiated by the coming Antichrist, is going to permit Israel to do their daily sacrifice in the temple. And they're going to start, and the first one will be with the red heifers. So sacrificing a red heifer at the Wailing Wall isn't the Holy of Holies. That doesn't make the way for the time of the Messiah. And everybody, whether it's polytheism, Judaism, Christianity, is looking for, Islam is looking for their Messiah to come back in this time period, right? So, so when we look at how Israel got there, we're not given prophecy as prophesied by God that they would be there, only a second Exodus gathering. But within prophecy, we see them there. So what has happened over time is many who are part of the order that runs the world are trying to bring about the end time. They want the showdown with God of the Bible. They want to win their freedom, and would be their sort of end goal here. And so they understand their prophecy, whether it comes from Nostradamus or for the Sibylline prophecies or whichever end of polytheism you're taking these prophecies from. It's got all a similar sort of story. They know that Israel needs to be in the end time. So now you have the Rothschilds, which is part of the intermarried into the bloodlines. Originally the Bauer family that comes out of Germany, right? And does the banking to replace the Templars. They are part of this mix, but not the controlling aspect. But to make the geopolitical stage work, Israel needs to be in the end time. So it's more of a gambit by the bankers and the secret societies and the royals to have Israel go back there to start laying the seeds down for the ability to bring about this end time showdown. So it was kind of contrived. That's why we don't have prophecy for it. Now, it doesn't mean God doesn't fight for Israel from a monotheist perspective in the end time, because he will, but this is not done by something that God has given or provided for in a specific prophecy as how that would come about.
Right.
And it's just the southern kingdom. And understand, the northern kingdom is yet to awaken. So we're seeing with what's going on in Israel today is just the sorrows, just the birth pangs of what's coming.
Oh, great.
Yeah, this is nothing. This is just,
Oh, shit.
and yeah, and even to the point where you're going to see an army that's larger than the Armageddon army that's going to invade Israel.
Certainly seem to be working hard to provoke an army of that sort.
Well, from their perspective, though, and not to take sides on this, from their perspective, though, is the nations that they are attacking have sworn to destroy them from the face of the earth and attack them every chance they get.
They just attacked Qatar the other day.
Yes.
I thought they do a lot of business with Qatar.
Well, you can say it's tactfully or strategically or both a bad move.
Yeah.
But what they're looking at is what happened with the terrorist attack that happened the day before, that the leaders of Hamas, who are in Qatar, even though they didn't get them by the looks of it, were basically saying, well, we didn't do it, but we're so happy that it happened, and they still haven't released their hostages.
Yeah.
So
It's kind of like what happened on 9/11 with America.
yeah,
you know.
So as you look at this, where does it begin? Where does it end?
Mm-hmm.
But what happens usually is all these things start when Israel gets attacked.
Yeah. Well,
But then you can
just
get
like
into
America,
yeah, well, that's just it. The question is okay, so that's what happened when it started. Does that justify with what you're doing towards the end?
Yeah.
That's a whole different question then.
That is a different question.
Yeah.
I've spent hours and hours trying to tell people the answer to that question, because it's the same for both the United States and Israel. They have the same exact playbook, and that is, in order to justify what we want to do, we have to be attacked. So let's put out all the bait we can and orchestrate and put the money where it needs to be. Everything from the Lusitania to Pearl Harbor to the Twin Towers, all orchestrated under the watchful eye of the rogue elements of our government, and I know that to be true, and the world is picking up on it. And I don't think October 7th was any different, to be frank.
Yeah.
Why was supposed to tell you, you have to stand down for 6 hours?
Yeah. So, and I'm not anti-Israel or for Israel.
Right.
I'm for the true remnant of Israel, but I understand there's a difference here between those who run the world, those who run Israel. Yeah. They all have a war gene.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter whether it's Putin. It doesn't matter whether it's Xi. Europeans, maybe we'll see what Donald Trump does, but we certainly saw what other presidents have done. The leaders have this violent war gene, and they're playing out the rivalry, right in front of our eyes, and they've done it throughout history.
Right.
So I'm very transactional on things. It's either right or it's wrong.
Where do you think they get their? This is a question. Where do you think they get their war gene? Is it from their relationship to certain deities, or is it from the interbreeding that was done with certain? The Bible would refer to them as. If you look at why the giants were created, they were to do what the gods didn't want to do, to get blood on their hands. They were there to destroy humankind and replace them. And they got very close a few times. And we're going to see that sort of resurge in the end time. So that war gene, whether it's an actual gene or not, the rulers of the world have been very violent all through our history. And they've all were kind of related, and it was always an inter-family fight. And the best way to look at that is World War I. Right. They were all first cousins. Right. Literally, like it's like the Godfather being played out, but with nations.
Yes.
You know, it's
Well,
crazy.
and understanding that analogy as a mafia group is quite appropriate with a
Mm,
godfather,
mm. Yeah.
right? Initiatory society, territories. It's like the if I can use the dualism of polytheism to describe it, they're like the mafia is like the dark hats, and the
Yeah.
royals look at them as the white hats. But then if they look at another set of bloodline rivals, they're the dark hats,
Right.
right? So it's just that sort of um, two sides of the same coin that are pushing everything in the same direction.
Mm. What? So Israel's closest allies here in the U.S. are obviously the Christian Zionists, particularly I think the evangelicals,
Yeah,
and of course they point to the Bible and claim that this is prophecy being fulfilled, which I'm sure there's absolutely validity to that for a lot of people. But like we've been talking a little bit about this prophecy, right? But
yeah,
how comes these two groups? How do they end up locked together in such an unlikely partnership, considering how we understand many,
yeah,
at least the Israeli Jews who I hear speaking about Christianity. It's pretty much a mockery. There's
yeah,
no true respect there for the
yeah.
people who believe in Jesus.
So they get there through similar but nuanced beliefs. So the Jewish people are looking for their Messiah.
Hmm.
Christians are looking for the return of
Of their
our
Messiah, yeah.
Messiah. Okay, so when they look at seeing Israel in the covenant land as the fulfillment of prophecy, they don't have a specific prophecy for that, except that it's a requisite for end time prophecy. They need to be there, but there's no specific prophecy for how they were to get there that we have, just
Hmm.
that they're there at the end time. So I try and get Christians to understand that that's not a prophecy fulfillment, that's a prophecy requirement for part
Hmm.
of the geopolitical landscape of the end time. And so both would like to bring the Messiah back, which is by definition going to be in the last 7 years. So
Right.
they're jointly saying we want to move this up. Now, the polytheists within Judaism, who have a different Messiah sort of imagery that would come. So when I'm talking about that, that would be Essenes, that would be Kabbalists, Sabians, all of the mystical side of the Jewish
Hmm.
culture. Um, they would be more aligned with like Lord Mithra, but they're going to want to see a nuance to that. They're going to want to see a specific relationship to the bloodline of that Messiah that's not Jesus, that's coming, that has a Jewish pedigree to it.
Hmm.
So and that's how they kind of get there. It's like we want the Messiah to come. We may want a different Messiah than you, but we want to bring this about. And what I try and get across to Christians is you don't want to live in the end time.
No.
It is going to be absolutely horrific.
Hmm.
So be careful for what you wish for, and be prepared for, what you're hoping for, because it's not going to be quite the way you think it is.
Right. Right. Um, it reminds me, excuse me, I've recently been learning a little bit about the Frankists and the Sabbateans,
Yeah.
and like, because not every group claiming Messiah authority comes from Jesus's line necessarily, as we were just mentioning. And history
Yeah.
is full of counterfeit movements that have
Hmm.
flipped this story around,
Yeah.
and the Sabbateans and Frankists, I think, are maybe could be grouped among these people, who promised redemption through essentially what could be perceived as sin and rebellion
Yeah.
by many people. Is how do they come into this?
Well, those are more when you say, Sabbateans and Franks. These are later groups of and more traditionally sort of Jewish mystical groups, right?
Yeah.
um, or related, maybe not pure, but related as those come downstream. But they're basically take the roots back to the Middle East,
Mm.
right? Back to generations before, when that belief system, was thriving. So I'm not as much focused on these individual little groups that may
Right.
have a little bit of light shined on them for a little bit of time, or if they, because some of
Okay.
these groups started like, in the 1600s,
Right.
right? So how important are they? They're not high up in the hierarchy. They're just subsets of other groups that, seemingly have a little bit more control, but they're getting more attention these days. But I think it just adds to the whole confusion, and I think it adds to the sense of urgency that's sort of gripping us, but we don't know what that
Mm.
urgency is, and we don't know what to do about it. And because things are spiraling out of control. So when we look at what's going on in the Middle East today, people are out there saying, well, this is going to this is the start of the Armageddon War, or this is the Gog War. It's like, nah, this is gonna keep going. But when you're talking about those two events, that's a scale you can't imagine. This is maybe the building blocks that will get there. But you got to get there through this process, because there has to be this covenant of peace
Right.
that is created, where Israel has a privileged, as we understand it, we more accurately should say Judah, as the southern kingdom, will have a privileged place there. They're protected in the world and are permitted to do their sacrifices. So it's going to take a lot for the world to stand up and put that into place. And you only get there through catastrophes, and in this case, catastrophe of war, of such horrific wars that almost look apocalyptic, but aren't, because they're still not going to be of the size of what's going to come after that covenant.
Mm. Wow. Yeah. Mm.
So it's going to let me just put it to you in this sort of frame of reference, and
Okay.
and again, whether it's from the Christian side or the other side, people are saying we're in the last 7 years, and this is going to they're so far out ahead of themselves, it's
Mm.
crazy. If you had a war or a set of catastrophic events that took away 10% of the population, what's that going to be? Like a billion
Mm.
people? Close to?
Mm. Almost.
Yep,
Probably like
almost a
800,
billion.
800 million. Yeah.
Yeah. So that would seem apocalyptic,
Yeah.
but that's not the size of the apocalypse.
What? Go
That is
ahead.
a small portion.
Yeah. Dare I ask what
So,
the size of the apocalypse is?
yeah, you get 3 doses in the last 7 years.
Wow.
25% destruction of
Mm.
all people, all things. 33% followed, and then 100% in full portion, unless there's an intercession, which is
Mm.
promised.
Thank God it's promised.
Yeah. So compared to that, but we've not seen that type of destruction, and our
No.
generation doesn't even remember World War II or World War One.
Right.
So if we see, even 100 million people, not that that's not a lot, that's going to seem like apocalyptic.
Right. I mean, it would seem apocalyptic to a lot of people, but their frame of reference probably wouldn't be the, end times in the
Yeah.
text,
Yeah,
but it would certainly
exactly.
be
It'll be horrible, and
right.
we won't even be in the last 7 years.
Mm. Yeah. Oh my God. So, we talked a lot about secret societies in our last podcast. I guess this is more. We'll go to a lighter topic and then we'll return to some of these. But I want to get into a little bit of the Merovingians, and
Yeah.
because they're said to descend directly from Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and of course that's very controversial to say. But do you in all your research, what have you learned about that so-called bloodline? Well, I mean, it is a bloodline, but about this possible descendants, and what do you think is there evidence that Jesus had children, and why does the bloodline seem to matter so much to the elites that they kind of, even though none of them are, really practice religion, they're like, well, I'm a descendant of Jesus, and it's like, okay, well, you can be chairman, like how does that? What do you?
So the bloodlines of the Merovingians
Mm,
was considered the most ennobled bloodline of its time. You could not get more royale, so to speak. And it had some significant ennobling of the bloodlines. So the bloodlines that would go back to the fallen angels were allegorized in the mythos with this quinotar that creates the bloodline. Um, Now, whether or not they're doing that to create like 4 watcher ennobling of bloodlines in there of the cherubim, different branches of the same order, hard to know. But they also graft in through their history um, bloodlines to King Saul. King Saul is the first king of Israel, and he's a Benjamite. He's
mm,
replaced by David because he violates the covenant quickly and doesn't listen and is replaced. But he has, according to the polytheist version here, he has descendants that survive through the Benjamites, and they migrate up the Danube River and into Germany. And those original bloodline royales will intermarry with the Merovingians, and these are the Sicambrians, and so you have a Benjamite bloodline that is grafted in. And that's important because we'll use King Philippe of Spain today, Philippe Bourbon, who is currently holding the King of Jerusalem title.
mm.
That comes down through the ages, through the Habsburgs, from the House of Lorraine Habsburgs, from the Lorraine
That's right.
region, right, and then back to the kings of Jerusalem and Godfrey de Bouillon, his brother, which is Baldwin the First, that's king, and Baldwin the Second of Anjou, another Anjou of the Lorraine region, and the first official king of Jerusalem was Baldwin the Second Anjou, and so they look at their right to Jerusalem, where they want to set up their capital, um, and where the Antichrist will rule from in the last 3.5 years with that King of Jerusalem title. So that's been grafted in, and they look at Jerusalem as their inheritance through that bloodline,
Mm.
because that was given to the Benjamites by Joshua in the book of Joshua. So yes, you have this interesting sort of mix where they're adopting things from the Bible for their own mythos and
Right.
pedigree and agenda and purposes. But it's designed to bring all religions back to the original religion and their belief system, which is the original Zoroastrianism that crosses the flood,
Mm.
and is what I call Enochian mysticism before the flood.
It's-
Invented, at least from the allegorical history. If it's allegorical, he's the one who creates the sun worship cult and the bull cult
mm.
through the developing of the 7 sciences. That's according to the Gnostics and the Polychronicon. So you have another bloodline that is going to be interjected into the Merovingians. That's Benjamite as well, because they claim in their records that Mary Magdalene was a Benjamite priestess
Mm.
and
I heard
royale.
she was in the
So
cult devices. Is that another? That's. I guess
yeah,
maybe that's another name for what was going on. There's a lot of stuff about both Marys were said to
yes,
be of the same school, so to speak.
yeah,
I don't know how true that is, or if that's just that is very Gnostic, though, right? They say that.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
um,
So
yeah.
so now they have two Benjamite justifications for that. Now they also, through intermarriage with the kings of Septimania, which were descendants of Judea, who fled after the diaspora. They were intermarrying with those bloodlines as well, which is the Judaic Davidic bloodline. So they've grafted in David's bloodline as well. And I cover all of this off in detail for people in book one. So I'm just going to go through the quick highlights here. And then they also add in Mary Magdalene and Jesus with the offspring of Josephus, the third son. Different accounts, but the most common one is the third son being named Josephus, is the one that's taken to Glastonbury by Joseph of Arimathea, which is now we're into the Grail records here, and that in the belief system, they believe that Jesus was taken down from the cross before he died and then revived and then taken to meet up with Mary afterwards, where they produced children. And then afterwards, Josephus as being the only one who's going to carry on with the Davidom title, as they coin it, with carrying the Davidic bloodline and son of Jesus, descendant of David, right? And for the throne of David, which is the ultimate goal here, that would match up with the King of Jerusalem title as you start to merge these mythologies and history and scriptures together. So now you have all of these bloodlines that are grafted in. And if you sort of think about why you would want to do this, I think, first of all, if you have Jesus grafted in, that just takes one major issue off the table in terms of, okay, Jesus is not a deity. He's not deity status. He's just a teacher and a prophet that the Gnostics believe. Right? Okay, so then that sort of brings him in, puts him into another position. And then it also can be used to bring down Christianity if they have evidence, which they say they do of this, so that they can start to develop their universal church. But the big thing is that they need at least the Davidic bloodlines in there to fulfill what they believe in their own prophecies for the end time, what the Antichrist is going to do, which is going to be introducing that new age with the covenant, bringing in Judea and the mystics back into it, and then turning on that covenant, because at the end of the day, they don't want anything to do with the Jewish people in any format, right? So that's why you get the persecution of Israel and Judah in the last 3.5 years, where they have a privileged position in the first 3.5 years. So this is, it's sort of a requirement to have in place, whether it's all true or not. That's up for everybody to make their own decisions on, right? But that's what you should expect, is this kind of pedigree, and that they had this ancient knowledge and the knowledge that they could bring down the Roman Church if they wanted to, based on the evidence they had about Jesus and Mary Magdalene, which is why the Roman Church was almost subservient to the Merovingians until they couldn't take it anymore, and organized a conspiracy to bring the Merovingians down and to wipe that bloodline out. But they didn't get them all, according to the history or mythology, depending on how you want to call it. And so Dagobert is the survivor of the Merovingian bloodline, who is the descendant of Godfrey de Bouillon, the folk of Anjou, and Henry de Paon, who are Anjou in the Lorraine region that organize the Knights Templars, who take Jerusalem and then become the first three kings and rulers of Jerusalem and produce this King of Jerusalem bloodline and title. And of course, unfortunately, they lost Jerusalem in 1187, which is why there was a splitting of the Elms and the senior order leaving the junior order, because the Templars lost their way and they lost Jerusalem. So, yeah, the Merovingian is a very important bloodline, and it was woven into significantly into the Stuart bloodline. And they were considered the most noble bloodline after the Merovingians at that time and bore the house of unicorn. And of course, the unicorn, that's seen on a lot of coats of arms, and I
Mm-hmm.
forgot to get into this a little bit earlier, is an allegory for cherubim.
Oh.
And the horn would be that third eye, or this special knowledge comes through. So how do you get there? Well, just quickly, in the Bible, in Ezekiel 1, 3, and 10, we get these cherubim that are pulling the chariot of God. And we also have reference to that in the book of Psalms. Now, the best analogy is the Greek analogy here, where you have these chariots being pulled for the gods by these horses. They're not like a Pegasus horse, they're something distinct, and they can fly. And in the old traditions, they had a horn. And so that's what's depicted using their taciturn allegory for a cherubim. So when you have a unicorn, that is saying there's a lot of ennobleness grafted in of different bloodlines, because you have 4 different groups within the cherubim that started 4 different bloodlines that's distinct from the seraphim. And then when you get that unicorn in with a dragon, well, now you have the ultimate sort of ennobleness to it. So
Wow.
it's and people ask me a lot, do I believe what they believe? I said it doesn't really matter.
Right.
I mean, they believe it, and that's what they're doing with that
Right,
belief
exactly.
system that we need to
Beliefs are
be.
powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and if that's motivating and driving their agenda to bring about
Yeah,
a
God help us.
specific set of events, yeah, it doesn't matter which side you're on.
No. No.
It's going to be horrible.
Right. That's the problem. That's my problem too. Is it seems like there are people working overtime too. Let's speed things along to get to that end point where everything is essentially back under our rule, according to prophecy. I don't know, but I wanted to ask you also about. Are you? Did you have more to say? I don't want to cut.
No,
cut your,
I think I
okay.
covered that off. Yeah.
You know, my question was about the Priory of Sion. I mean, have you? I guess like what proof have you uncovered in your research that the Priory of Sion isn't actually like a hoax, like many people have been told, and then how do they tie into this melodramatic bloodline Godfather story?
Yeah, and in book 1, I cover it off, and I cover off that a lot of people, say it's a hoax, and then in after my book comes out, I get a lot of people saying, "Well, he's talking about the Prior of Sion. He's obviously a wingnut." But here's the facts on it, and so much so I put this into book 2, just to have it sort of in a location where people can find some good information on it. So when I'm writing book 1, when I'm talking about the secret societies, I am using their own writings. Okay. And they're quoting sources within that. I verify the sources, but I'm using their writings. And so this is their belief system and their history. So in book 2, I get right to the sources and quote them directly and get it sort of all on the table, and without any sort of editorial from the people that are participating in this. So when I'll start in 1188. So typically in the Grand Master orders, we only get Grand Masters from 1188 forward. And then there's a transition from royals into the educated elite. So there's something changing. So you start with like de Guise and St. Clair as the first Grand Masters, and you start getting into people like Da Vinci and other scientists and writers that are going to be the Grand. So something's changing in that order, and 1188 doesn't line up very well with the Templars, right? who are formed in 1090 actually as a concept, 1099, and Papal Bull in 1128. So how do we get there? Well, we need to understand that this was the cutting of the elm. This was a splitting of the senior order and the junior order. The senior order is the Council of Barons, Council of Royals. And the junior order is the Templar, and that's officially sort of split into the senior and junior order in 1118 with the crowning of Baldwin II and Hugh de Payan becoming the formal first Grand Master of the Knights Templar, even though de Bouillon and Baldwin I were leading that organization before that. But this is now sort of the official sort of start. And so when we look at who are these barons, these are the royals that are funding Godfrey de Bouillon. This comes out of sources of William of Tyre and other historians that I use that talk about the same events in the same way with the same facts. And I quote them all in book 2. So just not, but William of Tyre might be a name that people are familiar with. That's why I use that. And he wrote that history as it was happening and was living amongst them in Tyre, right? So it sort of makes sense that his details might be a little bit more accurate, and it's considered an historical record unless you're talking about the Priory of Sion. Okay, so here's what happens is that you have this senior order, and then you're going to create this junior order, and then they split in 1188 because they lost their way. And that's why they do not come in support of the Templars in 1307, but it continues as the Red Cross Order, because the Red Cross Order is given to the Templars by Saint Bernard, right, who is royal as well in the Catholic Church, and it's symbolically awarded to him, but it is an ancient order of the Red Cross of the Royals that the Royals are going to keep, and so they form the Invisible 33 of the Royals, which we would know as the original Rosicrucian order, that is going to form some junior orders underneath as that develops after the fall of the Templars. And so you're going to have the Rosicrucians are going to, where you have the 33, and understand there's 13 families above that on the Thelemic tree. They're going to form the Committee of 300 families underneath, and then the Rosicrucians are going to be the intersection of Freemasons, Illuminati rising up into Rosicrucian to the bottom level, and the top level of the Rosicrucians is still going to be populated by the pure bloodlines. So that's how that sort of goes down to the upper nobility of educated elite, elim, who, are running the Priory of Sion order in the later ages. Now, how do we know that this name has any historical effect? Well, it's called the Order of Sion. The Templars are, and how they get their name is they are going to crown their kings in the Priory of Sion on Mount Hermon. Not on Mount Hermon, I'm sorry, on Mount Zion in Jerusalem. And so that's where you see the first election of a king. Just as you saw King Charles become king before the formal ceremony ritual that happened in the June later. So 6 months later would be the tradition, because you have to pass that authority on. So not Baldwin, but de Bouillon was crowned in a small priory on the Rock of Zion. And then the formal ceremony 6 months later, generally in June at that time, they would do it, where you would have it in the valley that's in Galilee in the Notre Dame cathedral. But the name comes from that small little priory that is then funded by de Bouillon, become this great temple, but that's going to be destroyed in one of the Crusade Wars. But that's where the name comes from. And William of Tyre walks you through that whole format, and then you can use some other historians to give you more details on that sort of formation. So if people want to get the history of it, I've got a few chapters devoted to it in book 2.
Nice. Nice. Awesome. So side note, are you, well, and maybe this is too, I'm just curious as to what you believe and if your beliefs are shaped by your faith or your research. Do you believe that Jesus has an actual lineage on this planet, like through Mary Magdalene?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't believe that. And I get there through my research and my belief.
Right.
It'd be a combination of both. So and again, you get down to making a choice.
Mm.
And whether people realize that or not, you have to make a choice in what you believe and try and verify what you believe. So
Right.
right, so that you can be comfortable with what you're believing. So I see what's going to happen because this is what those who are trying to bring about the New World Order say is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have the scriptural side and the research I've done on the scriptural side. And so I get how this has to come together. I see it fits. I don't, I don't like what's going to happen, but it's not up to me to like it. I just want to
Right.
know, right? So when I look at how you get there on a decision is it's really it's really personal, and I think you have to do enough research to be able to make that decision. And I have to tell you, the evidence that is going to come is going to be to substantiate what those who run the world have, and their evidence on what they have on Jesus is going to be very convincing.
Mm.
It's going to change a lot of people's preconceived beliefs. It's going to be that powerful. And so I want people to sort of understand that's why we were, from a Christian perspective, that's why we've been warned that even the elect is going to be deceived if that were possible.
Right. That's going to be the Antichrist.
Yeah, and he's going to say, "I'm the one who comes before."
Right.
And I did come before. And he's going to have all the credentials of Jesus.
Right.
He's going to have a resurrection. And he's going to have a Armageddon type war. That's the Gog war that we talked about, that he takes credit for. And he's going to promise this age of peace. And he's going to have insight and wisdom, as it's described in the book of Daniel, in ways that we can't even imagine. He's going to be that powerful and convincing. He's going to have all of these prophets prophesying things, and the false prophet in particularly doing miracles and prophecies in favor. It's going to look like, and he's going to be like, from a biblical perspective, the counterfeit Elijah, just as you need to have that, and a counterfeit Armageddon war. And he's going to promise an age of peace. It's going to look like, one should expect a counterfeit rapture of some form as well.
Yeah.
From a Christian, when I say counterfeit, from a Christian perspective, because if he's going to be the replacement Christ, or if he's going to declare himself to be who Jesus said he was, then to convince Christians, to get as many Christians over, and to convince as many Jewish people to come over to that, he's got to have those credentials.
Yeah, he's going to have quite the resume.
Yeah.
My God, if he's going to convince those two to come together.
And it's going to be confusing. In Revelation 6, where there's 25% destruction, and the people of the world who are running into their caves, which starts to explain why there were so many underground
That's
cities
right.
that were built beforehand
Mm-hmm.
because nothing new is under the sun. Why the secret societies, when they set up the town squares, set up all these tunnels and things underneath the cities?
Yep.
Why under all of the castles and famous mansions, they have these secret tunnels and chambers and stuff.
Right.
They will be running into those caves for protection in this war. And it is so horrible that even they say, all the people, whether it's the rulers, the merchants, the slaves, everybody who is there experiencing it is saying this is the wrath of the Lamb.
Yeah.
But it's not there yet. It's still to come. And Antichrist hasn't come to power yet.
Mm.
And then there's a worse war than that comes.
Because he would have to come to power in a global way, right?
He would.
Yeah.
And he would also have to have another Antichrist to beat.
Mm. Oh, yeah.
So
you would need the hero and the villain to rise.
Yeah. Well, you need
Two figures.
yes. And we're told there's going to be multiple antichrists. Now, you can understand that as rivals
Right.
because there can only be one family. But ultimately, there's one that's going to rise that Antichrist is going to make his claim to fame on as defeating the Antichrist. Right?
Right.
So that comes in the Gog War that we talked about. And he takes credit for that war. Then he moves his armies into Jerusalem and crowns himself in the temple and sets up his last 3.5 years. And he destroys the universal religion and sets up another religion.
Wow. I know a lot of people who are saying, the New World Order will come with a new world religion. And I'm like, well, that wouldn't make sense. If you're going to get everyone to actually believe and do the same things all around the world, then you would have to be religious. What else does that,
Well, and for their belief system is if they want to have this harmonic convergence or vibration into godhood, you have to have a world government and a world religion to be able to do that transition into godhood.
Right. Wow. Is AI... This is crazy to me how somehow this most recent invention, which is an extension. Let me just relearn the English language really quick. It's an extension of consciousness. Essentially, it's built and programmed to mimic sentience, and we call it artificial intelligence. And I'm like, the first word's very important, everyone. Okay, and the second word is subjective. So everyone just calm down, but it's funny because recently, people started to associate AI as, it's like the AI that's who's in charge of the archons and the reptilians and I'm like, well, how did we get artificial intelligence now into these ancient texts? It's like, where did do you think that's kind of like the same? Is it the modern form of that same forbidden knowledge? A kind of a final attempt to finish what the Nephilim began.
Well, it's a repeat of what Nephilim were trying to do, because nothing is new under the sun in all belief systems. What was will be again. There's cycles, right?
Yeah.
And so, but there was an ancient knowledge, and we don't know because we only get the part of history they want us to know, how significant that technology was. What we do know is that you had in the Masonic Gnostic version in Polychronicon that this knowledge was so important it needed to be saved. And they didn't know whether or not a flood was coming or a destruction by fire. And so they prepared for both. And so on the two pillars of Enoch and Lamech in those accounts is that one would float and survive a flood. One was designed to survive a destruction by fire. Destruction by fire is reserved for the end time. So floods kind of more of an intercession. But they knew if it wasn't going to be the fire, then it would be the flood. So this is the knowledge that was buried underneath the pyramid, a great pyramid, according to their legends and history. And this is going to be part of the knowledge that comes out. Now, this knowledge had the ability to build things we can't do. And if there's going to be destruction by fire that they prepared for, that means there was a technology to destroy the planet by fire, just as we're able to do now. So it's going to be like the days of Noah and the days of Lot that was actually destroyed by fire. So it's reserved for, and there's a technology that goes along with it. We know the fallen angels, the gods gave knowledge to humankind, all kinds of humankind, including Nephilim, who controlled the knowledge when they came, both before and after the flood. And so we're just catching up to that knowledge, I think. So when we look at artificial intelligence, and there's nothing new under the sun, this was here before. And that,
Wow.
yeah, so, but what is it? That's the real thing. And how far does it develop, and who controls what is kind of the question.
Oh, because,
being answered.
people do like to look at it like it's some kind of authority or like it has all the answers. It's not, it's omnipotent. It's almost like a deity.
Yeah.
So, wow.
Well, it could certainly get to be more powerful than us fairly easily.
Right.
But not the angels. They're not going to create anything that they can't eventually take control over, right?
Pull the plug.
Yeah, so this AI, though, but it's needed to get us to the level of technology where we believe we can fight in this angelic war and be like the people in Star Wars, to fight for our part in the rebellion, right? To have our seat at that kind of galactic table. So when we look at how powerful this knowledge could be, we get some reflections that, in Daniel 8:10, Antichrist actually goes into heaven and throws down some of the starry host when he comes to power. That means interdimensional capability. When the pit prison is open and all of the terrible ones and all of the ones that are locked in there for the fallen angels are coming out that were locked in there, right? That's in another dimension in the earth. That's interdimensional. So we have quantum computing that goes interdimensional. We have AI attached to quantum computing so that it can search in multiple universes and multiple locations in those universes and be much more efficient, because quantum's kind of like, using a bad analogy, more of a rifle shot. It's like a single search, right? So you need to be able to do more of it, and you need to be able to work back between the dimensions and a currency that can work interdimensionally as well and be secured from other dimensions so that the royals don't lose their wealth, because that's their power. So all of this has to be coming in place. And again, with the understanding, this would be angelic technology that was in place in prehistory. So is AI coming, and is it actually artificial intelligence, or is it demonic intelligence? What's interesting about the algorithms is there's an invisible algorithm, as they call it, behind what most people will see. In other words, it's in secret and it's protected. And it actually controls the agenda and the objective of the algorithms. And this is a key part of the AI development. And they call those invisible algorithms daemon algorithms, which is the Greek word for demon.
That's right.
So now what's interesting is that can a demon take a dwelling place within AI? Well, what we do know about spirit beings is that they need an oiketerion, whether in any dimension. And I know people aren't probably familiar with the word oiketerion. It's a Greek word, which means a dwelling place for the spirit. Shows up biblically in the habitation the fallen angels left when they created the giants. And also it's used one other time as a house in heaven, or a dwelling place. And it's defined as a dwelling place for the spirit. We would know that in the physical world for the oiketerion as a soul and a body. So that when you have a god taking a physical form, it creates its own soul and body and then puts its spirit into the soul that it merges with to have that physical presence on the earth. And from a Christian perspective, our spirit comes from heaven,
Right.
merges with the soul and the body, and then when our body dies, our spirit goes to sleep and back to heaven and waits for its resurrection.
Right.
So an oiketerion is required for a demon to interact in the physical world because it's lost its body. It died. And it does not
Enter
go
the
to
Terminator.
sleep. Enter the Terminator, yeah. So it needs a dwelling place for a
Shit.
spirit. So when it possesses somebody, it's suppressing a host for the most part. And I don't think it's a situation where it's symbiotic. I think it's a dominant force that's coming in, whether you invite it or not. Different than an avatara that adds wisdom to help the individual, power, knowledge, whatever it's going to help it with. Angelic, demonic, two different concepts, similar, but again, demons aren't as powerful as the fallen angels. And so when we look at this oiketerion, do we have anything in history or religions that suggest there might be something like that? Well, we have all sorts of things that come out of prophecies, like with the Sibylline prophecies, the prophecies of Delphi, all around the world, that there are objects and locations where there's communication, whether or not it's with demons or fallen angels or whatever other type of being you want to throw in there. I'll leave that for the individual. Biblically, we get something that's called a talking idol, a family idol. Again, that would be a name. Family idol would cross religions in terms of the understanding of that. That's a Hebrew word, teraphim. And it's not always translated directly as teraphim, sometimes just as idol, but it's when that word is used in the Hebrew, it means a talking idol. And sometimes it's translated in the KJV as a talking idol. So this is the word that's rooted in the Hebrew word Rapha, for healing, for demon spirit, and for a giant. The giant, demon spirit, and teraphim are all sourced out of 7495 Rapha. So these family idols that they were talking to get knowledge and prophecy that they're communicating with, even in the age of Israel, was some sort of dwelling place or a technology that had survived for these demons to that point in time. Roll this forward to the end time. Image of the beast. Like omnipotent power that can cause people who will not take the mark to be beheaded. That's interesting. They want them beheaded. That's a different rabbit hole. But this is an image or a projection that seemingly is like an artificial life because it's working on its own, but supposedly at the behest of the Antichrist to run the beast system. So you might imagine this AI that's being developed with this merging of this understanding of algorithms and demons that would be controlled by Antichrist. And he's described in Revelation 16 as demons coming out of his mouth. You could translate that as he's controlling the demons.
Right.
He has authority over them. And I think he has authority over the image. I don't think the image has control over him.
Right. Wow. Ooh. The implications.
Yes. But it will have to be a technology to do what it does, and it has to be a technology we have not yet achieved.
Yeah, at least that the public is unaware, at least in this modern era, right? Yeah.
Yeah, at least what we are aware of, what we can see from the outside looking in.
Okay. I wanted to do a quick speed round with you, but I know that some of these things are gonna require probably a little more time. But but maybe we could just touch on them a little bit and see how it goes. Okay. The bloodlines behind the New World Order / New World Religion, human or something else?
A combination of human and fallen angelic. You might see it allegorized as partially alien. There will be different groups of people within the visible hierarchy, like the elementals and a couple other groups in there. So you'll have to use some discerning to get there. But all these other sort of visible lower groups than the gods, or the highest levels of intelligence that they present us, are offspring of the higher levels of intelligence.
Mm. Is there one family that in your research seems to outrank all the others?
Only in their own minds.
Yeah, of course, of course.
For starters, but certainly the Anjou. Um, they have three rivals. They have two other rivals to the King of Jerusalem title. They're so competitive on that, and I think that they have the rightful for it. I would look for the Windsors as well.
Mm.
Um, but there may be some older families that we thought aren't around anymore, that where the Antichrist actually will come from.
Right.
So I like to be quite careful, but in terms of getting too specific on who's going to be the most powerful,
Right.
because again, we have to measure what the European influence is with the rest of the global influence. And if you have if he's indeed what he portrays himself to be from the Shah dynasty, from the dragon creator gods,
Mm.
then that's going to be a very powerful bloodline as well. And Putin thinks he's from the original Puchianin out of Kiev, the original Indo-Aryan Scythians that started the Tsars. A bit of a story of how you get there, but he's got his own mythos on that.
His claim to oligarchy.
Yeah. So we're going to see lots of bloodlines, but what we do know scripturally is that Antichrist is going to come out of the Greek and Roman Empire in that sort of geography. But that still leaves it wide open for other bloodlines that we aren't necessarily aware of, that may take their bloodlines back to, like Darius or Nebuchadnezzar or Egyptian pharaohs, because of the age and the length of how this works, right, in terms of this epoch. And if they're going to present a pedigree, it's going to
Which
have
they
to go
love doing.
which they love to do. Then it's going to be long and it's going to be interesting, and there's going to be several of them. So, but from a European perspective, I would probably look at the Anjou, and then remember that the Anjou is a junior offshoot of the de Vere and the Angevin. So again, as you get back into those families, you might see some names in the older pedigrees, but if they show their pedigree to the end, you'll eventually get down to a smaller group. So
I got one for you. Pop music, mind control or devil worship?
well, knowledge, music, science
Yeah,
is neither good nor evil.
that's right.
It's how it's used.
I agree. I agree. Some of
So
it
do
is
that on a transactional one-on-one. Look at the lyrics.
right.
uh,
Look at the name of the
look at the imagery.
right.
Make your own decisions from there.
Fairies and elves, are they real and are they on our side?
They're, well, depending on which side you're on.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. So they're going to be on somebody's side, and yes, they're real. These are the elementals. And there's 4 groups of elementals. 3 of them are little ones, and 1 are reptilian and larger than humans, called the salamanders. Are called elementals because they're associated with a basic element of the world. Each one is assigned one, like air or fire or water. So in the 3 groups of little ones, you have good-looking fairies, you have mischievous fairies, and you have ugly fairies. And in each of those groups, there's many of those subgroups in there. They're all created from the gods, all of the elementals. And there's one interesting group that's in the ugly group that's called gnomes that were in charge of genealogies, technology, and knowledge for the giants and the royals, and that they are described as the Greys. They have their own UAPs in modern sort of language, and they come through portals with these machines. They kidnap people, they do experimentation on them. These are the same descriptions identically as the Greys in the alien mythos. So what our ancestors would have understood as powerful fairies with flying machines, we understand as gray aliens, and that's just one group of this visible sort of organizational structure that runs this world. And so, yes, they're real, and we're going to have to discern between the groups and their agendas once they become, they're introduced to us formally, so to speak, as we get closer to the end time. We also get that biblically too, elementals, and these are the ones that enslave us in the world. They're also called rudiments. So Book of Colossians, Book of Colossians, a couple of special passages, and associated with the angels that rule this world.
Wow. I got one for you. Is Mark Zuckerberg going to survive the apocalypse?
Well, he's certainly planning to.
Yeah, I'll say. Build a bigger bunker, dude. My God, what do you know that we don't? Like, his bunker's bigger than most of the world's houses, Oh my God, it's crazy.
Yeah, he's certainly going to try to, but he seems to be quite low level, so he's not really all that important to them, but he's obviously of the genealogies. He was sponsored. Even his name, I mean, with Facebook and the logo, that was Tubal Cain imagery that they use on rings and secret societies. And then he changes the name to Meta, which is short for Metatron, which is the third book of Enoch, where Enoch, son of Cain, through his acquiring of knowledge, becomes an angelic figure. And this is the one providing knowledge to the development of AI and high level of technologies. And it has the ability to go between dimensions. So when you see metaverse and it's all
Oculus
their language. It's all their language.
And for the longest time, Zuck was developing his the metaverse where you could go, and I'm like, oh my God, like what is going on? But Gary, love having you on, man. I'm a little low on time, and we've been going for a while. I appreciate your time so much. Tell everyone where they can find you. I'm sure you're very busy, and I know that you're not so much on social media, but your books are just incredible. If you enjoyed this podcast, obviously you must pick up this man's books. Many of you listening have already read them and just love revisiting them. So Gary, tell everyone where they can find you and your books and everything else.
Yeah, the best place to get a hold of me is through my website. I'm quite busy, so social media sites running out of time to be on. But I try and spend a little bit of time. But so where I spend most of my time is through my website. So you want to contact me, there's a contact the author there. I'm running 2 to 3 months behind on responses, but if you're patient, I'll get back to you. On the website, there's a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of book 1, 84 chapters of book 2. So, and if you think that's the whole book, you haven't read anything that I've written, because it's a small drop in the bucket of what's in those books, believe me. And it's information that just keeps coming. And if you wanted to support me, the only support I accept is through book sales. So you can go to the buy page, and there's 3 buy pages: buy page 1, 2, and 3. Book 1 is buy page 1. 2 is for book 2. 3 is for the bundling and the discount. If you buy multiple copies on any of the other 2 sites, that's for getting multiple copies of the same book with the discounts.
Give them gifts. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you do make that mistake, shoot me an email because I do review all the emails coming in for in case there's special signings or things like that. Or hey, I ordered 2 books off of
Yeah.
book one, but I want one of each. I'll ship you both. They're both the same price, so it doesn't
Okay.
really matter. It's just the website makes me do it the bureaucratic way.
Right.
There's also links over to barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, amazon.ca from the buy page. There's also links directly over to Amazon for the digital version in Kindle for both books and for the Audible versions as well.
Nice. Amazing. So for everyone listening on YouTube, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. We are trying to build a following, and a lot of the content we post isn't quite as algorithmically friendly as this conversation has been. So we need your help in sharing this podcast, liking it. If you want to support my work, I have a Patreon page. Many of our podcasts have an uncensored version. Thank God this one does not qualify for that. So, but they do get a pre-release every week, and we have some really cool, special, customized merch to go with our really awesome logo. And you can support my work there. If you're listening on Spotify and iTunes, 5 stars goes a long way. Let us know what you thought of this podcast. You know, we're also trying to build our following there. And thank you so much for listening. Gary, you're the man. You're the man. It's an honor. It's a pleasure, man.
It's been fun. I love coming on different podcasts for different audiences because you know what? It doesn't matter where you come from. Everybody's looking for more information, and
Exactly.
if I can help in any way on that, that's what I'm here to do.
Amen to that. Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. You are helping. Absolutely. Your knowledge is incredible. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.